My name is Rosalind, and I'm 31 years old. I want to tell you something that happened to me that I still can't believe actually unfolded the way it did, and trust me, by the time you reach the end of this story, your jaw is going to drop just as hard as everyone else's did that night. It started with something that should have been simple. My parents had been planning a family trip for months, a long weekend getaway to celebrate my father's 65th birthday. They rented out a lakeside lodge about 4 hours from where we all live, a beautiful old property with 5 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a dock that stretched out over the water. I had heard them talk about it at Sunday dinners, had seen the photos they pulled up on my mother's phone, had even helped my younger cousin pick out a birthday card for my dad. As far as I knew, I was part of this trip. Nobody told me otherwise. Nobody asked me to arrange my own lodging. Nobody said a single word. So I took Friday off work, packed my bag Thursday night, and drove 4 hours with a cooler full of drinks and 2 birthday gifts sitting on my back seat. When I pulled into the gravel driveway of the lodge, there were already 3 cars parked outside. My parents' SUV, my sister Vanessa's minivan, and the rental my cousin Theo had picked up from the airport. I walked in through the front door carrying my bag over one shoulder and a bottle of wine under my arm, feeling genuinely happy. I was looking forward to this. I had been working brutal hours for months, and this weekend felt like a real exhale. My mother hugged me in the entryway. My father came in from the back porch and clapped me on the shoulder. Everything felt warm and normal. Then I asked which room was mine, and the warmth evaporated so fast it was like a window had been thrown open in January. My mother's face did something I had never seen it do before. It went completely still. She looked at my father. My father looked at the floor. And in that silence, I understood that something was very wrong before a single word was spoken. My father cleared his throat. He said they had booked rooms for everyone who needed them. Vanessa and her husband Gregory, their daughter Lily, my cousin Theo, and my parents themselves. 5 rooms for the 5-bedroom lodge. He said they had assumed I would make my own arrangements since I was the only one who lived alone and didn't have a family to think about. He said it so matter-of-factly, like this was a reasonable thing, like I was supposed to have somehow known this without being told. I stood there holding my overnight bag and my bottle of wine, and I just stared at him. Before I could say a word, Vanessa appeared at the top of the stairs. She must have heard us talking because she was already wearing the expression she always wears when she thinks she has the upper hand, this particular half-smile that I have been looking at my entire life. She leaned against the railing and said, very casually, that they had reserved rooms for her, Gregory, and Lily because they were a real family unit and needed their own space. She said it just like that. A real family unit. And then she looked at me standing there in the entryway with my bag and my wine, and she smiled a little wider and said that she was sure there was a motel in town that probably had availability. I felt something move through me that I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't just embarrassment, though that was part of it. It wasn't just anger, though that was there too. It was something older and deeper than both of those things. The particular pain of realizing that the people who were supposed to love you most had, without any malice or drama, simply forgotten to include you. And then watched it happen and smiled. I set my bag down on the floor. I set the wine down next to it. I looked at my mother, who was looking somewhere past my left shoulder, and my father, who was still looking at the floor, and I said very quietly that I understood. Then I picked my bag back up, left the wine where it was, walked out the front door, got in my car, and drove away. I didn't know where I was going yet. I just drove. The lake road wound through pine trees, and the late afternoon sun came through them in long flat shafts, and I had this strange, hollow, very clear feeling in my chest. I turned my phone over on the passenger seat so I wouldn't see the screen. I didn't want to see a message from my mother explaining the misunderstanding. I didn't want to see my sister texting to say there was probably a perfectly comfortable motel nearby. I just drove. What I didn't know, what none of us knew yet, was that my grandfather had been watching all of this from the back porch the entire time. 82 years old, sharp as a blade, sitting in a rocking chair with a glass of iced tea and an expression on his face that none of my relatives would understand until it was far too late. My grandfather, who had built our entire family's foundation from nothing, who had divided his estate carefully and quietly over decades, who loved us all fiercely and expected to be repaid in kindness. He had seen exactly what happened in that entryway. He had heard every word Vanessa said. and he had already reached for his phone. But I didn't know any of that yet. I just knew that I had driven for hours to celebrate my father's birthday and had been turned away at the door like a stranger. I pulled into a gas station parking lot about 20 minutes down the road, rested my hands on the steering wheel, and let myself feel the full weight of it. Then I started looking up hotels. My phone lit up. Dozens of missed calls from my mother, my father, even Vanessa. I ignored every single one. And then something happened that none of them saw coming. I found a small and about 12 miles from the lodge, a quiet place with white curtains and a room that smelled like cedar and clean laundry. I paid for one night, carried my bag upstairs, and sat on the edge of the bed in the silence. My phone kept lighting up on the nightstand. Vanessa, Mom, Dad, Gregory, even Theo, which surprised me. I watched the screen flash and go dark, and I didn't touch it. Whatever they had to say could wait. I had spent 31 years making myself available at every inconvenient moment, smoothing things over, showing up, adjusting. Tonight I was done adjusting. I ordered food from a small diner down the street, ate it alone at the little desk by the window, and went to sleep earlier than I had in months. The silence was the best thing I had felt all week. The next morning, I had 47 missed calls and a voicemail from a number I didn't immediately recognize. I almost deleted it. Something made me press play instead. It was my grandfather Raymond's voice, calm, unhurried, the way he always spoke, like he had all the time in the world and intended to use every second of it wisely. He said, "Rosalind, I saw what happened yesterday. I want you to drive back here this morning. Not for them. For me. Can you do that?" I sat with that voicemail for a long time. Then I got dressed, checked out, and drove back to the lodge. When I walked through the door the second time, the atmosphere was nothing like the evening before. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug and red eyes that told me she hadn't slept. My father was on the back porch with my grandfather, and through the glass door I could see them talking. My father with his head slightly bowed, my grandfather straight-backed in his rocking chair, speaking steadily. Vanessa was nowhere in sight. My grandfather saw me through the glass and held up one finger. "Wait there." So I waited. Whatever he was saying to my father, he finished it. Then he stood, came inside, and hugged me the way he always had, both arms, without reservation. He smelled like cedar and pine and old wool, and I had to press my teeth together to keep my composure. He told me to sit down. Then he called everyone into the living room. My parents, Vanessa and Gregory, Theo. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. He simply said that he had been sitting on that porch the previous evening and had seen and heard everything that took place in the entryway. He said he had watched his granddaughter drive away after being told there was no room for her at a family gathering and that her own sister had suggested a motel with a smile on her face. He let that sit in the room for a moment. Nobody spoke. Then he said he had spent the night on the phone with his attorney. He had originally planned to divide his estate equally among his children and grandchildren when the time came, a decision he had held for years. He said that what he witnessed the night before had shown him something important about the kind of people some of us had become when we thought the stakes were low. He said character is not what you perform in important moments. It is what you do when you think nobody is keeping score. He looked at Vanessa when he said that last part. His estate, the property, the investments, the accounts, would now be restructured. Rosalind would receive his lake house outright, the one that had been in our family for 40 years and that Vanessa had been openly coveting since she was 25 years old. The remaining assets would be redistributed according to a revised plan that his attorney was already drafting. Vanessa's face went through about 6 different expressions in 4 seconds. She started to speak and my grandfather held up one hand, and she stopped. He said he wasn't finished. He said this was not a punishment. It was a reflection. He said he hoped everyone in this room would think about what kind of people they wanted to be before his estate actually became relevant, because the truth was he intended to be around for a good while longer, and people had time to show him something different. Then he stood up and asked me if I wanted to take a walk down to the dock. We walked out there together, the two of us in the morning light. The lake was perfectly flat, and the trees on the far bank were reflected so clearly in the water, it looked like the world had been folded in half. My grandfather didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, You handled yourself well last night. Leaving quietly was the right thing to do. I told him I hadn't felt like I handled it well. I told him it had hurt more than I expected. He nodded like that was the correct answer. He said, "It's supposed to hurt. The ones who don't feel it are the ones you have to watch out for." We stood there until the sun was fully up. Behind us, through the lodge windows, I could see my mother setting the breakfast table, moving quietly and deliberately, the way people move when they are trying to make up for something without knowing exactly how. Vanessa did not come out of her room for the rest of the morning. I stayed the whole weekend. I helped my father blow out his candles. I sat with my grandfather on the porch each evening until the light was gone, and when I drove home Sunday afternoon, the lake house key was already in my purse, a small brass thing on a simple ring, heavier than it looked. Some people mistake silence for weakness. They see someone who doesn't fight back and assume they've won. My family learned that weekend that the quietest person in the room had the most important witness on her side.